Welcome back. We're starting a new series on the channel, season recaps for each team. We'll try to do as many teams as possible, and we'll start with the team that was ineligible for the postseason in the Akron Zips. This was a very interesting season for Akron. This was a season in which I think a lot of people expected some interesting things from Joe Moorhead. They also had some maybe concerns about Joe Moorhead's future with this program. So we'll dive into that. We'll dive into the offense, the defense, and the schedule as well. We'll start with the numbers. This is a team that finished 5-7 in 2025, and they were close to bowl eligibility if they were able to go 5-7. Though they come up short, and we'll dive into the schedule as to how close they were to potentially getting there, which is something that I talked about in the preseason. I thought this team could potentially get to a bowl game if they were to be eligible. Now, this is a team that struggled to put up points, also struggled to keep teams off the scoreboard. And that's not going to be a good formula for really any winning team. This is a team that started off rough too. They started off August and November with a 1-4 record, and then October, November, so kind of when they get into conference play, they finished the year 4-3. Now that's obviously not going to get the job done, and especially with the schedule they had, that is a little bit of a challenge to be able to win enough games to get to a bowl game. In terms of scoring, this is a team that kind of fell behind early in games and didn't do a ton to jump back out in those games or jump back into the game. So if they were behind, they probably struggled at times to get into those games. And some of the games that they lost were blowouts. So you kind of have to maybe take some of those out as well. If you take some of those big non-conference games out, then you're looking at a team that was a little bit better, but still not the greatest performance for Akron as a team as a whole. Now, when you look at the stats from this offense, Ben Finley, I think a lot of people expected certain things from him in terms of consistency. And I think you saw it at times, but also he struggled with his accuracy. 51.4 completion percentage, over 2,400 yards, 19 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. And it just shows that he's an experienced player who was coming back to an Akron offense that he understood, that he knew, and there were no better options on the roster that were going to be able to replace him. Or maybe they just didn't want to put a competition into it, or if Finley truly was the most consistent player for that team. The passing attack wasn't the most consistent or the greatest because Finley struggled so much with his accuracy, but still threw 19 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. Not a great touchdown to interception ratio, but I think better than you would have expected if you would have told people 51.4% over 2,400 yards, you probably would have guessed that he struggled with interceptions. And he threw 9, but it's still a better touchdown interception ratio than I think a lot of people anticipated. The rushing attack was the surprise. Now, we didn't really know who was going to be the starting running back. We didn't know who was going to be RB1. And Jordan Gant basically took over and didn't have any thoughts of looking back. This is a guy that was very consistent, and we saw him play at a high level at times this year. 213 carries for 1,032 yards. 6 touchdowns, averaged nearly 5 yards per carry. And that is very impressive, especially for an Akron offense that at times was struggling, was not able to move the football. And Jordan Gant provided them with that consistent player. And that's not a guy that we talked about coming into the year as an alpha on this team. And he was going to be a part of this, I think, but I don't think a lot of people anticipated he was going to take this big of a leap. I don't think a lot of people expected the rushing attack to be as good as it was at times. His best games, you look at the Duquesne game, they win 51-7, 161 yards, 3 touchdowns. He averaged 12.4 yards per carry. The Central Michigan game was his next best game, 32 carries for 176 yards. The Massachusetts game, the UMass, 28 carries, 153 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Got off to a little bit of a slow start, had 19 yards against Wyoming, 31 against Nebraska, 67 against UAB, but it's clear that the Duquesne game kind of launched him into a good rest of the season. only had 2 games after that under 80 yards. And I think that that's something that could be potentially exciting, assuming that he stays. A lot of these recaps that I'm doing, guys are probably going to transfer by the time that this is done being posted or people watch this. But Jordan Gant is a guy that is going to be fun to watch if Akron is able to, one, keep Joe Moorhead, and two, keep some of these players around. Now, the passing attack was not the greatest. They finished 93rd in passing yards a game. And I think you saw some potential talent. But again, if your quarterback's not able to get them the football, you can kind of see why maybe some of them would leave. We already saw Israel Polk hit the transfer portal, so he's not coming back. 525 yards, led the team with 8 receiving touchdowns. Marcel Williams led the team 45 catches, 641 yards, and 2 touchdowns. So you have guys that did some good things this year. Kyan Mason, 33 catches, 481 yards, 5 touchdowns. After that is where you see the production kind of drop off. But that's kind of what happens when your quarterback, in a way, struggles as much as he did. And you're hoping that maybe next year you can find a little bit more consistency with that group for the offense. Because this offense, if Jordan Gant is coming back, has a player that they can work around, that they can build around, and it's just a matter of finding the right talent to be able to get them to that next level. Now, when you flip to the defensive side of the ball, now defense wasn't much better. The defense was not great. They just weren't as terrible as they used to be in years past. And this is a team that we've seen that in terms of win-loss, they have taken steps forward. And you have to at least give Joe Moorhead credit for that. Probably a big reason why he is going to potentially come back. You've seen improvement. They started 2-10 in 2022. 2023 they go 2-10. 2024 4-8. In 2025 they are 5-7. So it's still not a bowl game, and they're obviously dealing with the bowl ineligibility, but they are still a better team than I think a lot of people realize. They made improvements. Now, when it comes to the defense had some really nice pieces. I think Elijah Reed was a highlight of this group. 47 tackles, 4 passes defended, 2 interceptions. One of the higher graded players according to PFSN. So he is someone who had a big impact. I think the defensive line did a great job this year. We had a lot of uncertainty about this defensive line coming into the season, and I think that they stepped up in a big way. Julian Lavenshire, 45 tackles, 10.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. Bruno Dahl, 44 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 4 sacks. Cyrus Durham, 31 tackles, 8.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks. So that trio right there did a great job of being disruptive and making plays that allowed them to potentially get the ball back and do some exciting things. So I think that this is a group that had some exciting things happen for them. Now, you did have a fair share of struggles. The secondary, I think, looked good at times, but also there were some explosive plays that were hit on this team that were just not very good as well. This linebackers, kind of the same thing. So, similar production in terms of disruptive numbers. Shimon Cooper, 4.5 tackles for loss. Gage Summers, 7. Melvin Spriggs, 5. So you had guys that were making plays. It's just that you weren't seeing it consistently enough to be able to make a big enough impact. And again, some of those plays that we talked about could have made a difference. I mean, you look at the Kent State game specifically. That's a game where you thought, okay, we can win this game. That gives us a great chance to finish the year and win that 6th game, but they come up short because of some of the inconsistent plays and some of the coverage busts that we saw. Now, when you go into the schedule was a very interesting one. You knew they were going to struggle early in the year, but you also saw opportunities for wins. Now, I thought the Wyoming game was one that they could surprise people, and they technically did, but they just couldn't get anything going against that defense. They lost 10-0. The Nebraska game, everybody anticipated a loss there. The 68-0 final score was definitely a surprise, but Nebraska was a team that was playing it really well early in the season. UAB loss is obviously one they'd like to have back, and that's kind of a theme here. There are a couple of games that they could have had back and would have changed their finish, and that's one of them. If they beat UAB at the beginning of the season, then they get that 6th win. Duquesne, they win 51-7, so it shows the offensive explosiveness. It shows the defense taking care of business. But then you get into conference play, and that's where you knew This is a conference that you can win football games in. The problem is that everybody can do that. Because the MAC is so condensed, you have a number of teams that are going to be in the running for winning a number of games, and Akron felt like they had a chance. Now, it didn't start off great. They lose to Toledo 45-3. The Central Michigan win was solid, 28-22, and then you have a little bit of a struggle with a 2-game losing streak to Miami, Ohio, who turned out to be better than expected. Losing to Ball State, I think, stings more than a lot of people realize. Now, you did bounce back strong. Kent State, or excuse me, Akron was able to bounce back with wins over Buffalo and UMass, leading to the Kent State game where you saw, okay, they're on a 2-game win streak. They're heading to hosting Kent State, where they should be able to win that game, even though Kent State was better than a lot of people realize. That was a game where Akron kind of let that one get away from them. They lose in overtime 42-35, and then they get the win against Bowling Green 19-16. So final year they finished 5-7, and it was a year where you thought there were some things left on the table. The Kent State game, obviously, the Ball State one is one they'd like to have back. The UAB win, even their loss, even the Wyoming loss, there were, I think, maybe some concerns about, okay, well, if we can't win that one, it might be a long year for us. But I think overall, Joe Moorhead has done a solid job of winning with what he has. He's already dealing with the transfer portal once again. He's had a number of players hit the transfer portal since the season ended, and it's going to be tough for him to win. It's going to be tough no matter what. He does have some nice pieces. He does have some things that he can build around in terms of this program. So if you're looking for a reason why he could potentially be successful going forward, there are things in this team, on this roster, that give you that belief. It's going to be tough. The transfer portal is going to take a lot of his best players. He's going to have to be able to recruit at a high level to be able to identify the right talent that can help them and bring them to a point where they're ready to contribute maybe earlier than anticipated. He also will have to use the transfer portal, looking at those FCS players, maybe even those D2 players that could play at the Division I level. This is a different era of college football. And even for guys like Joe Moorhead, there are opportunities to be had. Even though you have guys hitting the portal and leaving for other schools, you have an opportunity to potentially take advantage of this new era as well. And I like where they are potentially headed, but I know it's going to be a challenge with this bowl ineligibility and with the struggles at this program. They don't typically win, but Joe Moorhead has to find a way. 2025 left something to be desired. You came up a little bit short. Maybe that motivates this team for 2026. That is something to pay attention to. If that is the case, we're going to look back at 2025 and see that this team took some of those shortcomings and turned it into motivation to be better next year.